The training field of the Interstellar Survival Academy stretched across the dusty plains like a wound carved into the surface of Voresh 4. The moon's thin atmosphere shimmered with heat, bending light into wavering ribbons over the cracked ground. Cadets from a dozen species lined up in neat rows, each wearing standard-issue explorer kits. Ryan Hale stood among them, a lone human surrounded by bodies twice his height, with claws, scales, or translucent skin that glowed under the bright white sun. Even after months at the academy, he still felt a faint thrum of disbelief that he had been accepted into a program famous for washing out entire squads in a single season. Yet here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with beings who considered Earth a primitive curiosity and humans an unpredictable anomaly. The lead instructor, a tall insectoid woman named Instructor Shalra, clicked her mandibles before projecting her voice across the field through a vibrating chest plate. She was respected and feared, known for setting trials so brutal that even seasoned soldiers hesitated to repeat them. Her wings flicked once as she scanned the formation with faceted eyes that reflected every cadet at once. She paused briefly on Ryan, but moved on without comment. He knew that meant she had already assessed him earlier and would not waste time repeating herself. "Cadets," she said, her voice crisp and sharp. "Your next field assignment is a test of patience, observation, and restraint. You will disperse into the lower valleys and identify a docile creature native to Voresh 4. You will tame it, guide it, and return with it by sunset. Success will demonstrate your capacity to understand alien behavior. Failure will demonstrate your inability to follow instruction." A ripple of relieved laughter and chatter moved through the formation. Most cadets visibly relaxed. A few of the larger reptilian species exchanged confident grins. This was not a hunt, not a survival gauntlet, not a predator avoidance exam with lethal stakes. It was, by the expectations of the entire academy, an easy day. The kind of assignment instructors used when cadets needed a break from near-death experiences. Instructor Shalra raised one spindly arm to silence the group. Her voice hardened. "You are to select only docile species. That is an order. You are forbidden from approaching, provoking, feeding, tracking, or even observing the Gorax." At the mention of the name, a hush settled over the cadets. Even the most confident students straightened, their expressions tightening. The Gorax is not part of the assignment. The Gorax is not to be used for extra credit. The Gorax is not to be tested, challenged, or studied. If you ignore this warning, you will be expelled or possibly killed before expulsion becomes necessary. Ryan had heard the stories long before she finished speaking. Every species carried rumors of the beast, a towering, thick-skinned creature with horns like hooked scythes and jaws strong enough to crush armor. It was described as territorial, cunning, and vindictive. Entire research teams had disappeared after misjudging its hunting range. Even the Academy, which prided itself on harsh realism, posted reinforced barriers around regions the Gorax was known to pass through. Ryan had never seen one in person, but he had seen enough claw marks on stone walls and bent metal gates to understand the warnings. The instructor gestured toward the wildlands. "Go." Cadets dispersed in groups, each heading toward the plains where gentle creatures grazed among patches of violet grass. Some carried nets, others carried handheld sonic lures, and a few simply walked with confidence, knowing that the docile herbivores on this part of the moon were harmless enough to approach without equipment. The assignment was practically ceremonial for them, a chance to show finesse rather than strength. Ryan remained still for a few moments, letting the crowd thin before he moved. He did not feel the same light-hearted confidence that others displayed, but he also did not dread the task. He had always been comfortable observing animals, whether on Earth or in alien environments. He understood something many cadets did not. Even the gentlest creature reacted to the world with its own logic. He knew that if he wanted to guide an animal, he needed to understand how it perceived threat, comfort, hunger, or curiosity. He needed to pay attention to details that had no place in textbooks. The sun beat down as he walked alone across the cracked terrain, the ground crunching under his boots. Heat rose in shimmering waves, creating the illusion of moving shapes in the distance. He spotted a few common species grazing near shallow pools: the soft-furred telvi, the short-legged dune crawlers, and the timid hoop horns that bounded away at the slightest noise. Any of those creatures would satisfy the assignment. He could easily approach one, offer it a few nutrient pellets, and lead it back by sunset. The instructors would nod, mark his performance as acceptable, and move on. But as he examined the ground, a different pattern caught his attention. Near the edge of a dried stream bed, the dust had been disturbed by deep spiraling impressions, each circling outward as if something massive had rotated in place. Beside the spirals lay heavy claw marks that sank inches into the ground. The air around the tracks smelled faintly of scorched mineral dust and something sharp, like ozone mixed with musk. He crouched and laid his hand inside one of the indentations. His palm barely covered a quarter of it. Whatever made these marks was enormous, far larger than any of the docile species listed in the assignment guide. A rational cadet would have walked away. The tracks did not belong to any harmless creature. The spirals alone hinted at behavior too complex to be clumsy feeding or wandering. He had heard the instructors describe how the Gorax sometimes stood in place and twisted its body to mark territory, leaving spiraling ridges as a warning. The claw marks confirmed it. Yet instead of fear, he felt a magnetic pull, a curiosity that tightened around his thoughts like a clasp. He rose slowly and scanned the distant ridges. The horizon was empty, but he sensed the lingering presence of something powerful. The stories described the Gorax as a destroyer, a mindless predator driven only by rage. But Ryan knew that no creature survived long on a harsh moon by relying solely on violence. Even predators followed patterns. Even territorial beasts had moments of weakness, instinct, or hesitation. He believed that if he understood those patterns, he could learn something no other cadet had tried to learn. He walked toward the higher rocks, following the tracks with steady steps. Dust clung to his boots, and the air grew hotter as the wind died. The idea that he was disobeying direct orders flickered in his mind, but it did not stop him. He was not seeking the Gorax out of arrogance or hunger for recognition. He simply could not ignore the pull of something misunderstood, something every species feared because no one had bothered to look past its reputation. As he climbed the ridge, he paused, sensing that someone watched him. There was no visible movement, no shadow shifting across the rocks, but the land felt too quiet. The smaller creatures avoided the area entirely. Even the buzzing winged insects were absent. The silence pressed around him, thick and expectant. He stood at the top, letting the wind brush against his face, carrying heat, dust, and the faint trace of a musk that hinted at the creature's presence. He did not see the beast, but he felt the weight of an unseen gaze. Instead of fear, he felt a steady calm settle over him. The assignment was supposed to be simple, but he already knew he would not be returning with a harmless grazer. He had stepped onto a path that would make the Academy reconsider everything it thought it understood about humans, animals, and the limits of instinct. He exhaled slowly and continued forward, unaware that this quiet beginning marked the first step toward the moment that would shock the entire Academy, the moment when he would return not with a docile creature, but riding the very beast everyone considered untameable. Ryan moved down from the ridge with slow, deliberate steps, guided not by a clear plan, but by an instinctive pull toward understanding what the tracks meant. He had no intention of confronting the Gorax directly, yet he also knew he had crossed into an area that other cadets would never dare to enter. The silence around him became heavier the farther he walked, as if the land itself held its breath. The purple grasses gave way to patches of bare, stone-like soil hardened by centuries of grazing migrations. He noticed scratches along the rock walls, some fresh and some faded by the wind. Each mark told a story, The sweep of a tail, the drag of massive feet, the frustrated scrape of horns against stone. The deeper he went, the more he felt as though he had stepped into a private world the creature had carved out for itself. He paused near a cluster of large boulders shaped by erosion into spires that cast jagged shadows across the ground. A faint vibration trembled through the earth beneath him, too light to be a footstep but too steady to be random. It felt like the echo of movement from somewhere beyond the stone ridges, a slow rhythm that suggested the Gorax was not far. He stayed still, letting his senses adjust. The wind shifted and carried a smell that was unmistakable, a sharp, musky presence thickened with dust and something warm, almost metallic. It was the scent of an apex animal that lived without fear of predators. The scent alone could have driven most cadets back to safety, but to Ryan, it stirred a cautious interest. He had always been fascinated by creatures that lived on the extreme edge of survival, creatures that carved their own rules into the land. He kept walking, not recklessly, but with the awareness of someone who knew how to read an environment. He watched the shadows for sudden movement, tracked the wind for any shift in scent, and listened for the change in rhythm that would suggest he was being circled. Yet nothing rushed him. No breath roared from behind a rock. No thunderous step approached. The Gorax remained unseen, which only deepened his curiosity. A mindless beast would have charged already. A purely aggressive monster would have crashed through the boulders without hesitation. The silence meant something else. The creature watched him with purpose. That alone told him more than any academy briefing could have. He reached a dry ravine where chunks of broken stone formed uneven layers along the sides. The spiraling tracks appeared again, more defined here, as if the creature had lingered. He knelt and traced one of the ridges with his fingertips. The spirals were too deliberate to be random. They curved outward with steady pressure, creating patterns that repeated every few feet. Ryan realized that the Gorax did not simply mark territory in anger. It marked with intention, almost ritualistically, forming a boundary. This was not a mindless predator's warning, but a deliberate communication. The academy instructors described the creature as incapable of organized thought or emotional nuance. Yet the land contradicted those assumptions. The spirals were not chaotic. They were symmetrical. The claw marks were not the violent slashes of a raging attack, but more controlled, almost methodical. The realization pressed deeper into his mind as he studied the terrain. Every species the Academy trained worked from the premise that fear was the only bond between sentient beings and dangerous wildlife. Even the advanced species believed that respect meant distance, not understanding. Ryan saw something different. He saw intention in the patterns. He saw memory in the marks of past seasons. He saw behavior that hinted at complex intelligence. And he felt certain that the Gorax, for all its size and strength, behaved in a way that could be understood if one approached with patience rather than domination. He continued along the ravine, moving carefully across rocks warmed by the sun. He spotted crushed plants near a shallow depression in the ground where something heavy had rested recently. The shape suggested the creature had sat or lowered itself, which contradicted the idea that it was constantly in motion, driven only by instinctual rage. He touched the depression. The heat was still trapped in the ground. The Gorax had been here not long ago. He straightened slowly, his pulse steady. He knew he was close, but the absence of any immediate threat only sharpened his focus. As he approached a bend in the ravine, he heard a faint sound, not the deep growl he had braced for, but a strained, low rumble that vibrated weakly through the air. He froze, listening again. The sound came from behind a tangle of thorn-covered vines draped across a stone outcrop. He stepped closer, careful not to disturb loose rocks. When he looked around the vines, he saw movement. Massive, deliberate, but confined. His breath caught in his throat as he understood what he was seeing. The Gorax was trapped. Its front leg had slipped between two slabs of stone that had shifted since it stepped there, and a cluster of razor-thorn vines had coiled around the joint. The thorns punctured deep into flesh, and dried blood darkened the ground beneath the creature. The enormous beast strained against the restraints, but each movement only tightened the grip of the vines. It let out another low rumble, not a warning but a sound of pain. Its massive chest rose and fell with labored breath, and its curved horns scraped against the rock when it tried to lift its head. Ryan slowly stepped behind a large rock, not wanting to startle the creature. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the sudden understanding that he was witnessing a moment few had ever seen. The Gorax vulnerable. He watched its eyes, deep-set and sharp with exhaustion, scanning the ravine for predators or threats. Every instinct within the creature's enormous body screamed caution. Yet it remained trapped, unable to free itself without causing further injury. He breathed out quietly and crouched low. The situation ignited something inside him, a quiet, resolute conviction that no creature, no matter how feared, deserved to suffer in silence. He knew better than to rush forward or speak loudly. He studied how the Gorax reacted to small noises. When he shifted a pebble with his boot, its ears twitched sharply, and it tensed. When he stilled, the creature relaxed slightly, focusing instead on the pain radiating from its leg. Ryan recognized the delicate balance between being noticed and being seen as a threat. He needed to move slowly, deliberately, and with complete clarity of intention. He picked up a broken branch and lifted it slowly above the rock where the Gorax could see it. The creature's eyes flicked toward the movement, and a shallow growl escaped its throat. Ryan lowered the branch immediately. The growl stopped. He repeated the gesture, this time raising the branch only halfway. The Gorax watched, tense but silent. Ryan understood what that meant. The creature was reacting, not attacking. It was assessing. It would accept him in its presence only if he remained predictable. With painstaking care, he stepped into the open, keeping his movements slow and visible. The creature's eyes widened slightly, and its nostrils flared, drawing in his scent. Its chest expanded with a sharp breath, but it did not lunge or strain. It simply watched him. Ryan lifted his hands, palms forward, showing he carried no weapons. He spoke softly, not expecting the creature to understand the words, but hoping it would understand the tone. The Gorax's ears flicked again. It blinked once, a slow, heavy motion that revealed exhaustion. Ryan approached no closer. He let the creature read him from a distance, allowing it to decide whether he posed a threat. After a long moment, the Gorax lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in resignation to its pain. Ryan stepped closer by a single pace. The creature did not react. He took another measured step. Still nothing. He continued forward until he was close enough to see the thorns embedded in the creature's flesh. Its blood soaked the vine clusters, and the jagged shapes looked like organic barbs designed to trap rather than merely prick. He knew he could not simply yank the vines away. He needed to remove them carefully, otherwise the creature would suffer more and possibly panic. He reached slowly toward the nearest vine, watching the Gorax's face. When his hand touched the thorn-covered plant, the creature growled again, a deep rumble that shook the air, but it did not snap or jerk backward. Ryan spoke in the same calm tone, reassuring with voice and body language. He tugged the first vine gently, loosening it from the stone, and the creature exhaled sharply as the pressure eased. He worked steadily, pulling the vines apart, snapping thorns carefully with a bit of metal from his belt, avoiding sudden motions. The creature's breathing became less frantic, and its gaze softened, shifting from anger to wary confusion. When the last vine fell away, Ryan stepped back to give the creature space. The Gorax lifted its massive leg slowly, flexing it with a cautious motion. It let out a low rumble, not one of warning but of release. The trapped foot slid free from the stones. The beast stood fully again, towering above him, horns curving like living blades. Ryan did not move. The creature stared at him, its breath hot and heavy in the air. It could have ended him in a heartbeat. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging what he had done. Ryan felt a quiet shift in the world around him, a moment suspended between fear and understanding. He realized that something had changed, not just in the creature's freedom, but in its perception of him. For the first time, he sensed not hostility, but recognition. He stepped back slowly, giving the beast room to leave. The Gorax turned, limped a few steps, then looked back at him once with an expression he could not fully interpret. It walked into the shadows between the rocks, disappearing with slow, measured strides that left new patterns in the dust. Ryan stood alone again in the quiet ravine, but the silence felt different now, less oppressive, more expectant. He did not know what the creature would do next or whether he would see it again, but he felt a certainty settle within him. He had crossed a threshold that no cadet in the academy had dared approach, guided not by strength or pride, but by curiosity that refused to submit to fear. And somewhere beyond the rocks, the Gorax moved with a new awareness of the strange human who had approached it without aggression and left without trying to claim victory. That single moment would become the seed of something larger, something the Academy was utterly unprepared to witness. Ryan remained in the ravine long after the Gorax disappeared behind the stone formations, letting the silence settle around him like dust. He felt the tremor of adrenaline slowly draining from his body, leaving behind a strange calm that made the world seem sharper. The wind returned gradually, brushing across the rocks as if the land itself exhaled after holding its breath. He knew the creature was still somewhere close, watching him from a distance he could not measure, and that knowledge wrapped around him like an unseen current. He stepped away from the vines, examining the ground where the Gorax had paused before leaving. The grooves in the soil showed where it had braced its weight, and he saw a faint smear of blood trailing toward the shadows. The injury on its leg was not life-threatening, but it would slow the creature for at least a short while. He wondered how many predators considered the Gorax prey in such a state, but the thought felt absurd. Nothing on this moon hunted it. The idea of vulnerability belonged only to that moment he had witnessed, a rare crack in the image the Academy had painted. He climbed out of the ravine and moved along the ridge with careful steps, following the faint traces of its path. The afternoon sun tinted the horizon in a pale gold that made the rocks glow. He had no plan for what he would do if he found the creature again. He only felt the pull to understand it, a pull that had grown stronger since he had helped it. Every instinct told him that trust between a human and such a beast was unlikely at best, but he also knew that trust did not start with certainty. It began with moments like the one he had just experienced, moments where neither side attacked despite every reason to do so. As he continued, he noticed new signs in the environment. The smaller creatures returned to the area, appearing cautiously along the edges of the ridge. Winged insects hovered in the air, their thin wings catching the light. The land seemed to reawaken as the Gorax moved away, but the calm did not lessen the pressure in Ryan's mind. He focused on the shadows between the larger stones, expecting at any moment to see the massive frame reappear. Instead, he heard a distant rumble, not of danger, but of movement, as if the creature's heavy gait echoed through underground cavities beneath the rock layers. The sound guided him like a distant pulse. He walked slowly, allowing the terrain to dictate his pace. Sharp stones threatened to twist his ankle if he stepped without caution, and pockets of loose gravel forced him to balance carefully. The planet's heat still pressed against his skin, but he barely felt it. His attention remained fixed on the faint clues that hinted at where the Gorax had gone. He reached a wide plateau where the wind carried the scent more strongly, mixed with an earthy bitterness that suggested agitation. He recognized the shift immediately. The creature had not simply wandered off to rest. Something had caught its attention. He descended from the plateau and heard a heavy thud, followed by a scraping sound, something large moving against stone. He moved quietly toward the source, and soon saw the massive silhouette beyond the slope. The creature stood near a twisted rock formation, its enormous frame outlined by the fading light. The wound on its leg caused it to favor one side, and every step sent dust spiraling upward. Yet its stance was alert, not weak. Its head turned sharply toward a smaller predator lurking near the rocks, a lean, four-legged creature with a narrow snout and spined tail. The smaller predator circled cautiously, drawn toward the scent of blood. Ryan felt a tension rise inside him, a mixture of fear and fascination. The Gorax did not seem afraid, only irritated by the pest circling it. It let out a low growl, and the smaller animal hesitated. But the scent of wounded prey emboldened it, and it crept closer along the rocks. Ryan knew the Gorax could destroy the smaller predator with a single strike, but the injury on its leg limited its movement. He watched as the predator lunged, aiming for the vulnerable side. The Gorax twisted its body to avoid the bite, but the sudden shift strained the wounded leg, causing it to stagger. Ryan acted without thinking. He grabbed a handful of stones and hurled them at the predator with swift, powerful motions. The first stone struck the ground near the creature's feet. The second hit its flank hard enough to make it yelp. The predator growled at him, baring sharp teeth, but Ryan stepped forward with a determined shout, waving his arms aggressively. The predator weighed its chances for a brief moment, then sprinted away with a frustrated snarl. When Ryan turned back, the Gorax stared at him. No wind, no sound, no movement disturbed the moment. Its deep, dark eyes locked onto his with a strange intensity he could not interpret. The creature lifted its head slowly, drawing in his scent again. It took a step toward him. Not fast, not threatening, but deliberate. Each movement made the ground vibrate under his feet. He held himself steady, his breathing slow, knowing any sign of panic could shift the balance between curiosity and aggression. The Gorax stopped inches from him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from its body. Its breath washed across his face in warm, heavy waves. It lowered its head until its horns hovered near his chest. He knew the slightest tilt would impale him, yet its posture felt almost contemplative. As he watched, the creature touched its muzzle lightly to his sleeve, inhaling deeply. The gesture sent a jolt through him. This was no mindless attempt to intimidate. It was recognition. The creature was marking him with scent, the way territorial animals acknowledged non-threatening presences. He lifted his hand slowly, allowing the creature to see the movement. The Gorax watched, its eyes narrowing slightly, but it did not step back. He placed his hand gently against the side of its massive neck, feeling the thick, rough texture of its skin. The creature's muscles tensed under his touch, then relaxed in a slow, rippling motion. The moment stretched between them like a fragile thread. He knew the wrong gesture could break it, yet he also sensed that the creature understood his intention with a clarity that no Academy instructor would believe possible. He stepped back, and the Gorax rumbled softly, following him with its gaze. When he turned to leave, he expected it to walk away in the opposite direction. Instead, it took a slow step behind him. He paused. The creature paused. He walked again. The creature followed him with 3 heavy strides, closing the distance until it walked beside him, its massive form moving in sync with his smaller one. He felt his pulse quicken with a mix of awe and disbelief. He was not guiding it. He was not commanding it. It chose to walk with him. He led the way toward the more open terrain near the ridge. The Gorax matched his pace, sometimes pulling slightly ahead, sometimes falling back. It examined him with glances that felt almost analytical. When he reached a flat area of wind-scoured ground, he sat on a low rock, exhausted from the day's tension. The Gorax stopped directly in front of him, lowering its head near his knee. It did not lie down, but it rested enough to show that it no longer saw him as a threat. The sun dipped toward the far horizon, and long shadows stretched across the plain. Ryan looked at the creature, feeling a sense of connection that defied logic. The Academy would never believe what he was witnessing. No cadet in history had ever described such a moment. He watched the Gorax's slow breathing, the subtle twitch of its ears, the gentle sway of its heavy tail as it stabilized its stance. He understood then that something irreversible had happened. The creature had accepted his presence. It had allowed him to approach, allowed him to help it, and now stood beside him as though he were part of its environment, not an intruder. He felt a quiet certainty rise in his chest. This was the beginning of trust. Fragile, tentative, but real. As the light faded, the Gorax looked toward the distant cliffs with a rumble that sounded almost like a call. It turned its head back to him once, and he sensed the invitation in the gesture. When it began to walk again, it did not move away. It waited for him to rise and follow. Ryan stood, breath steady, and walked beside the creature into the deepening dusk, unaware that the bond forming between them would soon overturn everything the Academy believed possible. Ryan followed the Gorax into the deepening dusk with measured steps, guided by the rhythmic thud of its heavy gait and the distant glow of fading sunlight brushing the rocky horizon. The air cooled rapidly as night approached, turning the warm dust into a thin layer of gritty frost beneath his boots. The creature walked ahead at a slow, purposeful pace, glancing back occasionally as if expecting him to keep up. Each glance carried intent, not impatience, but acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that his presence was accepted. He felt the strangeness of the moment settle over him like a veil, the realization that he no longer wandered the harsh terrain alone, but moved beside a creature considered the embodiment of untamable brutality. When the sky darkened fully, he saw the faint luminescent strands of moss growing between cracks in the stones, glowing blue in the starlight. The Gorax seemed to follow a familiar route, stepping carefully around areas where sharp crystals jutted from the ground. Ryan watched the creature's movements closely, noticing how it adapted to its injured limb. The wound slowed it but did not diminish its awareness. Each time an unfamiliar scent drifted through the cool air, the beast's ears twitched sharply and its muscles tensed, ready to react. The way it monitored the environment reminded him of seasoned wilderness trackers on Earth, always alert, always half listening to what the terrain whispered. The creature led him to a shallow cavern carved naturally into a cliffside. Its mouth was round and smooth, shaped by wind erosion over centuries. The Gorax entered first, ducking its massive horns under the curved ceiling. Ryan hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether following was a wise choice, but the creature turned its head toward him with a low, steady rumble that resonated through the stone. It was not a warning. The sound felt like an invitation. He stepped inside, feeling the temperature shift to a gentle, dry warmth. The cavern was broader than it appeared from the outside, forming a sheltered chamber illuminated faintly by the bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. The ground was covered with fine dust and old, dried plants the Gorax had possibly gathered during earlier cycles. The creature moved to a corner, lowering itself slowly onto its uninjured side. It exhaled heavily, closing its eyes for a brief moment. Ryan watched it carefully, noting how the steady rise and fall of its chest suggested exhaustion more than weakness. He sat near the opposite wall, leaving a respectful distance, knowing that trust could not be forced. He leaned back against the cool stone, letting the calm settle around him. After a few minutes, the Gorax opened its eyes again and studied him, its gaze reflecting the dim light. Ryan had seen many animals observe humans with curiosity or wariness, but the intensity in this creature's eyes felt different. It was as though it tried to understand the strange, small being who had helped it, and then walked beside it without hesitation. He held its gaze without challenging it, offering a quiet presence. The creature's breathing slowed, and its posture softened. He knew that any predator capable of crushing him with a single strike would not relax so close to a potential threat unless it felt a degree of confidence. He also sensed that confidence could fade instantly if he made the wrong move. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant wind outside the cavern. Ryan drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, waking whenever the creature shifted. At one point, he felt a vibration in the ground as the Gorax pushed itself upright. He opened his eyes to see it limping toward the cave entrance. Instinctively, he stood and followed at a cautious distance. The creature emerged onto a flat section of rock overlooking the plains. The night sky stretched above them in a vast, star-filled dome, with swirling nebulae painting the heavens in pale violet streaks. The Gorax raised its head and released a low, drawn-out call that rumbled through the air. The sound echoed across the rocks, fading slowly into the distance. Ryan realized it was not a territorial call or a threat. It sounded more like a way for the creature to announce its presence to the silent world around it. The creature lowered its head and turned slightly toward him. He walked closer, stopping at its side. The Gorax leaned its weight onto its healthy leg and shifted slightly, making room as though inviting him to stand within its protective circle. He stepped closer until he could feel the warmth radiating from its body, contrasting sharply with the cold night air. For a long moment, the two simply stood there, gazing out at the landscape bathed in starlight. Ryan felt an unexpected sense of peace, grounded by the steady presence of the creature that once existed in his mind only as a legend of destruction. When dawn approached, the first hints of pink light streaked across the sky. The Gorax returned to the cavern and lay down again. Ryan used the brief calm to examine the injury more closely. The wound had stopped bleeding, but dried clots still clung to the creature's fur. The surrounding skin remained swollen. He retrieved a small canister of antiseptic spray from his belt pouch, unsure whether the creature would tolerate his approach. He knelt nearby, watching its reaction. The Gorax lifted its head and sniffed the canister, pupils narrowing at the foreign scent. Ryan spoke in a low voice, taking slow breaths to remain calm. He extended his hand, letting the creature examine the object more closely. The Gorax snorted, releasing a warm puff of air over his wrist, and lowered its head again. He interpreted the gesture as reluctant acceptance. He leaned forward carefully, spraying the antiseptic onto the wound. The creature flinched, muscles tightening in a ripple, but it did not move away or snap. He continued with steady, gentle motions until the wound was clean. The creature exhaled deeply and closed its eyes, allowing him to tend to it without resistance. He knew this was a significant step. Trust built through repeated positive encounters, and each moment of cooperation strengthened the fragile bond forming between them. When he finished, he stepped back to give the creature space. It shifted slightly, testing the leg with more confidence. The swelling would take time to fade, but the worst of the damage had passed. The Gorax rose slowly, shaking dust from its broad shoulders. It eyed Ryan with a new expression, one he could only interpret as cautious respect. It took a step forward, lowering its massive head. Ryan hesitated, then reached out and placed his palm against the creature's neck again. The warmth beneath his fingers felt steady and powerful. The creature stepped toward the cavern entrance and waited until he followed. It walked ahead briefly, then circled back, brushing its flank lightly against his shoulder. The contact, though subtle, was deliberate. He recognized it instantly as an invitation to travel together. He walked beside it as it left the cavern, heading toward the open plains. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ground, and the world seemed to glow with fresh clarity. The Gorax moved with a more natural gait now, the pain lessening. It occasionally looked in his direction, making sure he remained close. As they reached a low hill overlooking the valley, the creature stopped and turned its massive frame toward him. It knelt slightly, adjusting its posture in a way that seemed almost symbolic. The message was unmistakable. The creature was showing trust at a level he had not thought possible. He slowly approached, placing one hand on its thick hide. The Gorax did not flinch. Instead, it lowered its body farther, as though offering him the impossible, a place on its back. He hesitated only a moment before climbing carefully onto the creature's broad shoulders. It rose with effortless strength, and he felt the world shift beneath him. He held onto the thick fur for stability as the Gorax began to move, carrying him across the plains with heavy, powerful strides. The sensation was unlike anything he had imagined, both exhilarating and humbling. He understood that this moment would redefine the limits of what humans could accomplish in the eyes of the Academy. As the creature carried him through the brightening dawn, he felt the certainty settle deeper within him. This was no accident. This was the result of choices made through patience, observation, and respect. The Gorax accepted him not as a master, but as a companion, and together they were headed toward a revelation that would shake the foundations of the Academy's understanding of both species. The Gorax carried Ryan across the brightening plains with a steady, powerful rhythm, each stride shaking the ground in a deep, pulsing beat. From his position atop the creature's back, he saw the Academy buildings rising in the distance, their sharp metallic outlines glinting under the morning sun. He felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease as he drew closer. The assignment had been simple, something expected to last only a few hours. Yet he had been gone long enough for instructors to grow suspicious and cadets to speculate. He imagined the reactions waiting for him: shock, disbelief, fear, and he wondered how anyone would interpret what he had formed with the creature beneath him. He did not ride with pride or arrogance, but with quiet certainty, understanding that the moment he appeared on Academy grounds would mark a change he could not reverse. The Gorax maintained a controlled pace, adjusting each step to keep him balanced. The fact that it considered his position at all felt like a revelation. Every movement was intentional, aligned with a mutual understanding he had not expected to reach so soon. As they approached the outer training fields, the first groups of cadets came into view. Students walked through the open gates carrying small, docile creatures, furred grazers draped across their arms, gentle horned animals guided on simple rope harnesses, creatures no larger than a backpack perched on shoulders. These cadets laughed in relief, eager to complete what they believed was an easy triumph. The moment the Gorax emerged over the ridge, the laughter collapsed into stunned silence. Several cadets froze mid-step, eyes widening, jaws slackening. A few dropped their tame creatures, which scampered away in fear. A pair of reptilian twins stumbled backward, tripping over each other as the massive beast descended toward the field. The sound of its heavy gait thundered across the plains, drawing attention from every corner of the grounds. Within seconds, whispers erupted into urgent shouts, and students rushed away in panic, clearing a path in every direction. Ryan kept his posture steady, one hand gripping the thick fur while the other rested nearby to brace himself. He felt the creature's muscles shift under him with calm assurance. The Gorax did not roar or display aggression. It moved with controlled confidence, ignoring the fleeing cadets. Its head remained level, horns angled with deliberate neutrality, signaling no desire to harm. This alone would have been unthinkable to anyone watching from the ground. Across the field, Instructor Shalra sprinted from the main hall with 3 other instructors close behind her. Her wings vibrated in agitation, sending sharp clicks through the air. The instructors skidded to a halt when they saw the creature approaching. Even from afar, Ryan saw the disbelief ripple through each of them. Instructor Shalra stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling with an intensity he had never heard from her. She shouted for cadets to clear the path, then motioned frantically for the other instructors to stand ready in case the creature attacked. The Gorax reached a flat section of training ground and stopped. It lowered its head slowly, allowing Ryan to slide down in one smooth motion. He landed gently on the ground, knees bending to absorb the impact. The creature took a single step back and settled its weight evenly, waiting for him. He placed one hand against its neck to reassure it, feeling the warmth pulse through its skin. Instructor Shalra stared at him, her mandibles partly open as she struggled to understand what she was seeing. Ryan stepped away from the Gorax with deliberate calm, maintaining the trust the creature had in him. The instructors tensed, expecting an attack, but the Gorax remained utterly still, its eyes focused on him with unwavering clarity. Instructor Shalra approached slowly, her steps measured, her gaze shifting between him and the creature. She demanded an explanation, her voice sharp yet unsteady, but he spoke quietly, recounting only what mattered in that moment. The choices he made, the understanding he reached, and the fact that the creature had chosen not to harm him. As he spoke, The Gorax exhaled and lowered itself onto its forelegs, making itself smaller, a gesture the instructors had never witnessed. It was not submission, it was acknowledgement. Instructor Shalra recoiled in shock, and murmurs spread rapidly among the gathering cadets. Those brave enough to return crept closer, forming a wide circle around the creature. The small, docile animals the cadets had tamed earlier bleated nervously, sensing the presence of the apex predator. But the Gorax did not react to them. Its entire focus remained on the human it had allowed into its world. Ryan stepped forward and placed both hands on the creature's side. It shifted slightly and let out a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. Several cadets gasped, convinced the sound signaled aggression, but Ryan recognized it instantly. It was the same sound it made in the cavern, the sound of calm presence. He turned to the instructors, explaining that the Gorax understood intention, responded to respect, and reacted to patience. He spoke with clarity, his voice steady, knowing that despite the fear surrounding him, the truth was undeniable. He had earned something no cadet had ever managed. Instructor Shalra listened, torn between disbelief and stunned acceptance. She approached the creature with extreme caution, stopping several meters away. She raised one hand, testing its reaction. The Gorax shifted its gaze to her and let out a short exhale. The sound carried no threat. It simply acknowledged her attempt to understand. At that moment, something shifted in the air. An unspoken realization that Ryan's experience had revealed a truth the Academy had overlooked for years. The creature was not untameable. It was simply misunderstood. Ryan stepped back and stood beside Instructor Shalra. He did not ask for praise or recognition. He did not display triumph. He knew the bond he had built existed because he respected the creature's world long before he ever touched it. He explained softly that the Gorax did not become tame. It chose not to be an enemy. The distinction mattered more than any rule in the Academy's manuals. Instructor Shalra lowered her head slightly, acknowledging the depth of his insight. Her wings folded close to her back in a posture of solemn recognition. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting warm gold across the field, the Gorax rose and stepped toward Ryan again. He placed one hand against its muzzle. The creature blinked once and turned away, striding across the plains with powerful, confident movements. Students parted to let it pass, watching in awestruck silence. It moved toward the ridge, pausing briefly to look back at him before disappearing beyond the rocks, leaving behind a trail of dust shimmering in the light. Ryan remained still, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something permanent. He had not conquered the beast. He had not tamed it in the way the Academy defined taming. He had formed a connection rooted in understanding deeper than instinct. The instructors gathered around him, asking questions, struggling to interpret what they had witnessed. Instructor Shalra placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of respect from someone known for her rigid discipline. She told him that the Academy would need to revise its teachings, reevaluate its assumptions, and rewrite entire sections of its survival doctrines. He looked toward the ridge where the creature had vanished and felt no sadness, only a profound sense of completion. The bond he had formed with the Gorax did not require possession or constant presence. It lived in the memory of trust exchanged when no one else watched. He knew he might see the creature again someday, perhaps on another training mission or in a distant corner of the moon. But the connection did not depend on that possibility. It already existed where it mattered. As cadets approached him, still shaken but filled with curiosity rather than fear, he realized this moment would reshape more than the Academy's rules. It would reshape how every student viewed the creatures of the galaxy, and perhaps how they viewed themselves. He had shown that understanding required courage, patience, and humility, not dominance. And for the first time, the Academy understood that a human had revealed something larger than the assignment, something that would echo through future generations of survival training. Ryan stepped away from the instructors, breathing in the crisp air of the new day. The plains stretched before him, vast and open, carrying the distant memory of heavy footsteps fading into the horizon. He felt grounded, changed, and quietly triumphant. The story of the untamable creature had ended not in conquest, but in connection. And that, he knew, was the kind of ending that would endure far longer than any legend of fear.